Ricky Carmichael, amply nicknamed the GOAT, is the greatest motocross racer that has ever lived. But unlike other sports where the GOAT moniker is debatable because someone is at least statistically comparable to a previous generation, when it comes to motocross, no such debate exists because there are no comparisons. Ricky Carmichael's career statistics read like a scroll of savagery against the competition. 10 straight outdoor championships, 5 supercross championships, 3 XGames gold medals, 150 total AMA career wins, 102 of those coming in outdoor motocross, which is more than double of his closest competitor. He went undefeated twice in outdoor motocross and once in East Coast supercross, and won a title on every brand and size of motorcycle that he competed on, and never once relinquished an AMA championship that he won. But what is probably the most impressive Carmichael statistic is his 75% career win rate in outdoor motocross. This doesn't make him just the greatest motocross racer that has ever lived, but he is the most successful two-wheel competitor of all time. Dirt bikes, flat track, road racing, TTs, trials, drag racing, bicycles. Nobody kicked any more ass on two wheels than Ricky Carmichael. And he did it arguably during the most competitive, cutthroat era of American motocross. This guy squared up against a Mount Rushmore of motorcycling legends like James Stewart, Chad Reed, and Jeremy Mcgrath. But under the surface of all of this dominance lies one of the most unconventional and inspirational sports stories you may ever hear. Because it's a story of a kid who despised racing motorcycles so much, he would often cry in his helmet before a race. It's a story about a family who sacrificed everything that they had and lived out of a motorhome in the back of a constructor's parking lot for 2 years just to pursue a dream. It's a story of a man with a work ethic that bordered on insanity, combined with a desire to win that was so bad he would practically isolate himself in the woods, train from sunup to sundown, and redefine how future motocross generations would train. This is the story of the GOAT himself, Ricky Carmichael. Ricky Carmichael entered the AMA professional ranks in 1997 at the age of 16, signing with Mitch Payton's Pro Circuit Kawasaki team. And at that time, he was the most successful amateur racer ever with 67 titles. But despite his impressive amateur career, questions lingered about Carmichael's ability to transition to the professional level. And one of those questions was about his size. Standing at just 165 centimeters tall as a teenager, then eventually squeaking out to about 170.6 centimeters as an adult, he was very short by motocross standards. In addition to that, he also had a very stocky build to him. So there were questions about whether he could handle the physical demands of a larger motorcycle. But not only was Carmichael's size and weight not prototypical, he didn't come from a motorcycle racing family. You see, most kid racers that you see have a father, an uncle, or somebody in their family that was a racer, that knows how to work on a motorcycle and understands the basics of how to ride them. But for Ricky Carmichael, his parents didn't have any prior experience. And not only that, his family was not rich, so hiring a coach for him was out of the question. And because of that, his mother, who at the time had no previous motocross experience, took over the role as his trainer, and his father took over the role as his mechanic. While the sport of motocross may have been new to the Carmichaels, hard work was not. Their theory was success will come through hard work and dedication, and their goal was to outwork everyone, and that's exactly what they did. Carmichael explains during an interview with Off Camera with Sam Jones that because my parents had no background in racing, they couldn't tell me how to go faster. My mom would say, listen, they're going faster than you in the turns. You need to go into the corners faster and come out of them faster. Never, how do I do that? Or can you tell me how to do that? So I had to figure it out myself. This took hours and hours of miserable practice, and I hated to practice. But as unconventional as this may have been, it worked because Carmichael did get faster. But as his speed and wins increased, so did the financial commitments of the family. To keep Ricky in racing, his mom would often work concessions for the racetrack so they would waive his race entry fees. His dad would quit his good-paying electrician job where he had years of seniority to move closer to racetracks and training facilities, and even at one point selling his beloved Harley-Davidson in order to get Ricky to a motorcycle race. And at one point, the Carmichaels sold everything they had and ended up living out of a motorhome in the back of a constructor's parking lot for 2 years. While many kids these days don't seem to care about the sacrifices their parents make for them, Ricky Carmichael did. At a young age, he understood and realized what his family was doing for him. He would also tell Sam Jones in the same interview, "I couldn't give up. I couldn't sabotage anything because honestly, I didn't want to let my parents down. My parents never said you need to go out there and win. The pressure was from me not wanting to let my parents down. I had to win." So by the time he made it to the professional ranks, even though he was young, he was seasoned. And he even promised his father that when he became a pro, the first thing that he would do is buy his Harley-Davidson back. And when he signed with Pro Circuit, that's exactly what he did. Once Carmichael turned professional, it wouldn't take long for that "I'm going to win no matter what" mentality to pay off. When in just his second professional race at the Atlanta Supercross, he would claim his very first professional victory. He would win 3 of the 7 races that season as a rookie in the 125 East Regional Supercross Series, finishing 3rd overall in the championship. But that didn't tell the whole story. Carmichael's aggressive riding style and pin-it-to-win-it mentality that he developed throughout his amateur days made him a hit with the fans. He often rode on the ragged edge, throttle wide open, swapping back and forth throughout the obstacles. It was sort of a controlled chaos. He was clearly the fastest rider out there. Now, at the end of each 125 season, which is now called the Lights class since they're not racing 2-strokes anymore, the East Coast and the West Coast meet up in a showdown for bragging rights to settle the debate of which coast is the best coast. It's like Supercross's version of TURPAK and Biggie. It's awesome for the fans. And back in those days, the king of the support class in the 125s was Kevin Windham. He was an up-and-coming prodigy of his own who had 2 dominant seasons in West Coast Supercross, winning 16 out of the 18 races that he competed in. Not only that, he was about a year and a half older than Carmichael and had 1 more year of professional Supercross experience. Now, the build-up that year going into the East-West shootout in Las Vegas was epic. Windham claimed it was the most important race of his young career. Carmichael played down the significance of the race by saying Windham was the one that needs to be under the pressure because he's been in the class longer. The teenage hubris was magical, and the fans were excited to see whether or not Carmichael had anything for Kevin Windham since nobody was able to challenge him effectively over the last 2 years. When the race started, Carmichael stormed aggressively out front, but Kevin Windham slotted into second place and with his smooth, effortless style began to chip away at Carmichael's lead, and he eventually caught up and passed Carmichael. But in the very next corner, Carmichael comes right back at Windham, block passes him, and makes contact with him prior to the whoop section. However, Carmichael would make a mistake in the whoop section and Windham would pass him and slowly start to pull away and work the lead up to 8 seconds at one point. It was clear that night that Kevin Windham was the faster rider, but true to form, Carmichael never gave up. He just kept pushing and pushing, crashing several times until he crashes in the whoop section bad enough to end his night. As if that's not bad enough, the camera pans over to an emotionally dejected and physically beaten Ricky Carmichael, who's standing on the side of the track, bawling his eyes out in frustration and pain at the precise moment that Kevin Windham is riding by, raising his hands in victory. It was brutal and embarrassing. At which time, legendary Supercross announcer Art Ekman asked his esteemed colleague and Hall of Fame racer David Bailey, "How do you think the youngster will handle this adversity?" And David Bailey promptly responded, "Carmichael's the kind of kid that learns fast from his mistakes. I feel sorry for everyone next weekend. And he was right. The next weekend at the opening round of the Outdoor Nationals, Carmichael smoked the field. Then he continued that domination throughout the season by winning 8 of the 12 rounds. He would have no trouble securing the outdoor title in his rookie season, and by doing so became one of the youngest AMA champions in history, as well as having one of the most dominating rookie campaigns ever. It was clear that this kid meant business. In 1998, Carmichael learned his lessons from the 1997 Supercross season and put an absolute hurting on the field. He won every single race, finishing the 125 East Regional Supercross Series unbeaten. He would have a great battle with John Dowd at the East-West Shootout in Vegas that year, but he would redeem himself with a win, capping off a historical and unbeaten season. When the Outdoor Series came around, he would win another 8 out of the 12 rounds and easily take the title again. This would become his second straight Outdoor 125 championship. He would also announce that season that for 1999, he would be moving up to the 250 class in Supercross to challenge the greatest Supercross rider of all time, Jeremy Mcgrath, but he would remain in 125s for the Outdoor Series. Jeremy Mcgrath was the undisputed king of Supercross. By the time Carmichael made it to the 250 class, Mcgrath had already won 5 out of the last 6 Supercross championships and damn near went unbeaten in 1996. And in those days, he was so dominant at Supercross, he made it look easy. So the question going into that 1999 season was, can Carmichael run with Mcgrath and take the title from him? And the answer was no. Carmichael's rookie Supercross campaign on a 250 was a disaster. His overly aggressive riding, along with his youthful exuberance and will to win, got him into a lot of trouble with the 250. His numerous crashes left him injured early on in that season, and he was never able to really challenge Jeremy Mcgrath. He would go winless for the first time ever in his career, and to make matters worse, during the Las Vegas round, he would crash hard in the whoop section, and when he hastily got back onto the track, he was absolutely leveled by Greg Albertine, and this was a direct reflection of how his 250 rookie campaign went. It was just a disaster. He would step down to the 125 class for the outdoor season and, of course, easily dominate, winning 9 out of those 12 rounds. Now, some of the fans felt that the luster was taken off of that title because he was cherry-picking. But it didn't matter, because by the time he left 125 motocross, he would have a total of 26 wins and 3 championships, making him the most successful 125 motocross champion in AMA history. When the 2000 Supercross season rolls around, Carmichael looks re-energized. Ready to learn from the lessons of 1999, he is 1 year older and 1 year wiser. And the question, is this the year he takes the title from Jeremy Mcgrath? And the answer is no, because Carmichael again struggled for most of the year. He did improve on his results from the 99 season by having a few podium finishes, and he actually got a win at the Daytona Supercross, which is more of an outdoor track than a Supercross track, but he was clearly struggling all year. Now, not only is motorcycle racing physically brutal, but it's also a what have you done for me lately sport. And after 2 lackluster seasons in the 250 Supercross class, it didn't take long for the fans and the press to start turning on poor Ricky Carmichael. The press started to say, "I told you so. He's too small and not strong enough to handle the power of a 250. Kawasaki should just let him race the small 125 in the big boy class." And as you could imagine, this was an absolute insult and utter nonsense to someone like Ricky Carmichael. Perhaps the motorcycle industry forgot who this kid was and what he had gone through to get to this point. They seem to have forgotten that he has spent his entire career being doubted. And if we've learned anything up to this point, nobody backs Ricky into a corner. When Carmichael's rookie 250 campaign began, even though he was so dominant on outdoor circuits throughout his entire career, his poor showing in 2 Supercross seasons on a 250 left people wondering, if he can't handle a big bike for 20 laps during a Supercross event, how will he survive 2 30-minute-plus motos on rough and ruddy racetracks during the sticky, humid summertime heat? Plus, American motocross at that time was going through a French invasion with guys like Sébastien Tortelli and David Vuillemin, and the odds-on favorite to win the title that season was Sébastien Tortelli, because Tortelli was already a two-time European MXGP champion, once in the 125 class and once in the 250s. Also, the previous year, Tortelli was well on his way to winning the AMA Outdoor National title before he broke his wrist. So the thinking was this was his title to lose, and he would lose it, because right from the opening round in Glen Helen, Carmichael put the entire field on notice when he won both motos to take the overall. He would have a few close battles here and there with Sébastien Tortelli, but it really didn't matter what country or what planet you came from, because the outdoor world belonged to Carmichael. He would never really be challenged that season at all, and he would go on to win 9 of the 12 rounds that season and take the 250 title in his rookie season. At this point in Carmichael's career, he now has 4 straight AMA Outdoor National Motocross titles, if you include the 125s, and 1 regional supercross title, all before his 21st birthday. While as impressive as the outdoor title was, it wouldn't take long for the attention to shift towards the upcoming supercross season and the criticism of Carmichael and his lackluster performance over the last 2 seasons in supercross. Now, most members of the press, and even some of those who were close to Carmichael at the time, said that he was just an outdoor rider and he will never be able to beat McGrath. But what they didn't know is that Carmichael was making big changes, and he is about to alter the course of motocross history forever. As the saying goes, if you want to be the man, you got to beat the man. And in order to beat Jeremy Mcgrath, who is the man, Carmichael realizes he cannot leave any stone in his game unturned. No more Big Macs and Slim Jims. He needs to be in the best shape possible. He needs more strength, more stamina, and more perfection. He would revamp his program in a way that no other motocrosser had ever done before. It would be so radical that it would redefine how the future generations of racers would train and what would be expected of them in terms of their physical fitness and daily regimens. Carmichael would buy a huge plot of farmland in southern Georgia, far away from Southern California practice tracks and factory facilities that had long been the epicenter of American motocross. He would build himself a cabin to live in, then build a top-flight supercross and outdoor motocross track to practice on, buy himself a bulldozer and a water truck to keep it nice and groomed, and go to work. He then hired a personal trainer by the name of Alden Baker, who, just like Carmichael's mom, had no prior experience training motocross athletes. So basically, Carmichael locks himself in the woods with a dirt bike and isolates himself from all worldly distractions, where he has nothing to do but train. Carmichael would spend that entire off-season in a strict, isolated training regimen far from the public eye that resembled more of the Rocky IV montage when Rocky was trapped in a Russian cabin training in the snow for his upcoming match with Ivan Drago. It was that intense. And by the time the 2001 season opener started in Anaheim, Carmichael is noticeably thinner, and he had that look, that eye of the tiger. But no one seemed to care, because fans replaced their hopes to dethrone McGrath on the shoulders of David Vuillemin, and pretty much everyone forgot about Ricky Carmichael. And after an opening round win by Jeremy Mcgrath and a 3rd place by Carmichael, it kind of looked like it was going to be the Mcgrath show once again, and he would go on to win another title. But not so fast, because at the 2nd round of the Supercross series in San Diego, it would go down as one of the most memorable and historical Supercross races of all time. When the San Diego Supercross race started, Jeremy Mcgrath jumped out to an early lead with Carmichael a close second. And within just a few laps, Carmichael and McGrath's race pace is so fast, they've checked out on the entire field, and it's now just a 2-horse race. For the next few laps, the two are swapping positions back and forth. It's intense. The crowd is going nuts. The smell of 2-stroke premix has left the stadium in this foggy cloud. It's exactly what racing is all about. Now, the two stay close until the halfway point, when Jeremy Mcgrath makes a small mistake and Carmichael gets by, taking the lead. And at that moment, for all of us fans watching, myself included, we thought any minute now Carmichael is either going to crash out or tire out running this pace, and somehow, some way, Jeremy Mcgrath is going to end up winning this thing. But lap after lap, it didn't happen. The lead kept getting bigger and bigger, and Jeremy Mcgrath kept fading until he eventually got passed by Mike LaRocco and ended up finishing third. And when Carmichael crossed the finish line in first place, you could see the emotion in him, how he had that sense of, I finally did it, how all the sacrifices he and his family had made and the hard work mentality that they believed in finally paid off. And honestly, it's really hard not to be inspired by that. But even though this was an all-time historical race, most people left that stadium convinced it was a fluke. And the following weekend at the Phoenix Supercross, that's what it looked like, because Mcgrath fought off the charges of Carmichael and ended up winning the race. And thus the chants began. The champ has responded. Carmichael's just a one-hit wonder. It's Mcgrath's title to lose. It was all fun while it lasted. But they were wrong this time, because little did we know at the time that would become the last Supercross race that Jeremy Mcgrath would ever win. From there on out, Carmichael won the remaining 13 races left on the calendar. He would end up winning 14 out of the 16 rounds that season, making it one of the most dominant performances in Supercross ever. The only one to match such dominance was Mcgrath himself. And when the outdoor season came around that year, nobody had anything for Carmichael. He would win another 8 out of the 12 rounds, and he wasn't really challenged at all that season. And that would become his 5th straight outdoor title in American motocross. For the 2002 Supercross season, Carmichael would switch from Team Kawasaki to Team Honda. So early on, there were questions as to how he would adapt to the Honda. Also, King Jeremy was back looking noticeably thinner and seemingly more hungry to recapture his throne. But a hungrier Mcgrath and a switch from Kawasaki to Honda did nothing to slow down the Carmichael machine. Carmichael did dig himself into a little bit of a hole at the start of that season when he took a vicious crash at the opening round in Anaheim, knocking himself silly and busting up his nose, finishing 20th. But it wouldn't take him long to get back to his winning ways, and from there on out, he would win 11 out of the 13 rounds to take his 2nd consecutive 250 Supercross championship. At this point in Carmichael's career, he's already an all-time great. He's just racing for legacy points. And what better way to rack up some legacy points than in Carmichael's beloved outdoor motocross series, where he would do the unthinkable. In the 2002 AMA Outdoor Motocross season, Carmichael becomes the first rider ever to win all 24 races and every single round, going unbeaten that season. A feat that at the time was considered impossible, but Carmichael did it. And truthfully, he made it look easy. And at this stage, just 6 seasons into his professional career, Carmichael has 1 regional supercross championship, 2 supercross titles, 6 outdoor titles, and 1 undefeated season, making him a 9-time AMA champion and one of the most successful motorcycle racers in history before his 24th birthday. He could have walked away right there and been an all-time great. But Carmichael's not done. By the 2003 Supercross season, everybody is under the impression that Carmichael's going to run away with this thing again, because there isn't anyone left in America that can even challenge this guy. But there is somebody from Australia who can. Chad Reed was a young Australian who had success in America. He had won the 2002 125 East Regional Supercross Championship, and he was Mcgrath-esque with his riding, very smooth and very controlled. But not much emphasis was placed on Reed since he would be a rookie in that class. However, all that would change when Chad Reed caught everyone, including Carmichael, off guard by winning the opening Supercross round that year in Anaheim. Carmichael would come back swinging, taking the next 3 victories in a row at Anaheim 2, San Francisco, and Anaheim 3. Reed would respond by winning the next round in San Diego. Then Carmichael would go on a 4-race win streak. At this point, it looked like Carmichael had broken the spirits of the young Australian, but Chad Reed had other ideas. He would catch fire and reel off 5 consecutive race wins. But even with that late season charge, Carmichael still had a chance to clinch the championship at the penultimate round in Salt Lake City. But during that race, he got clipped by Chad Reed's teammate Tim Ferry. Then he was taken out by Chad Reed while battling for first place. Now, Carmichael would remount and finish in second place, meaning that the title would now go down to the final round in Las Vegas. But you could tell Carmichael was pissed about this, especially the Tim Ferry incident. Even with all that, going into the final round at Las Vegas, Carmichael still had the advantage. He had a slim 10-point lead over Chad Reed, and all he needed to do was finish second place to secure the title, and that's exactly what he did. Chad Reed would go on to win that night, but Carmichael took his second place and his 3rd straight Premier Class Supercross title. Now, going into the outdoor season that year, fans were interested to see if Chad Reed could challenge him like he did in Supercross. But the answer to that question would be no, because it wasn't close between Carmichael and Reed. But what was close was Kevin Windham, because he was riding on the all-new Honda 4-stroke, and he was all over Carmichael in many of those rounds. And it was clear at that time that 2-strokes were now becoming a disadvantage in motocross. Now, of course, we could argue that the rule book at the time favored 4-stroke development, and that is true, but that's obviously a story for another time. Because it didn't matter what bike Carmichael was riding, it didn't matter what track he was on, what the conditions were, or what was written in the rule book. When it was all said and done, nobody could match Ricky Carmichael's speed outside. He won 9 out of the 11 rounds that year, capping off another dominant outdoor season. So then the question becomes, is there anybody who currently lives on this planet that has access to a dirt bike able to beat Ricky Carmichael? Well, some fans in the media think so, and his name is Stefan Everts. Now, Stefan Everts was the GOAT of Europe. He was a 10 times world champion that amassed 101 wins throughout his career. And that was a record that had stood up to 2023 when Jeffrey Hurling surpassed him. He was by far the most successful MXGP rider of all time. But the problem would always be, how will we ever get these two to meet on a track together? Now, for those of you unfamiliar with the sport of motocross, each year there is a race called the Motocross des Nations, and it's a team-based event. But the original purpose of this was to get the best riders in the world on the same circuit. And at the 2003 Motocross des Nations, fans would finally get their chance to settle the debate that had been bothering them for the last decade, because Ricky Carmichael and Stefan Everts would finally be on the same racetrack at the same time, competing against one another. But this wouldn't be any old racetrack, because this race is going to be taking place at the brutal and unforgiving Zolder circuit in Belgium, which just so happens to be Stefan Everts' home track in his home country. So not only is Carmichael giving up home field advantage, he's going to be bringing a knife to a gunfight, because he will be racing on the 252 stroke and Stefan Everts is going to be racing on a 454 stroke. No way he can beat Stefan Everts under these circumstances. Well, yeah, he can. The battle between the two was close for a little while, but Carmichael did what Carmichael always does. He maintained an intense pace from start to finish, and he wore Stefan Everts down and coasted to the win. And at that point, there is no denying that Ricky Carmichael is the greatest motocross racer of all time. Now being the undisputed world champion, the attention is focused on the 2004 Supercross season, and back to the topic of Chad Reed. Would Chad Reed be able to beat Ricky Carmichael? Unfortunately, we would not get to see that battle, as right before the season opener, Carmichael would injure his knee, tearing his ACL in a training incident, and he would miss the entire Supercross season, and Chad Reed would win the Supercross title. Going into the outdoor season that year, the press definitely had their talking points. And the first was Carmichael's injury. Now, there wasn't social media back then, so we didn't have 140 podcasts and motocross news outlets reporting on his rehab constantly. So not many people knew if he was even riding a bike. The second was that Carmichael would be contesting the outdoors on a 4-stroke instead of a 2-stroke. So there was this theory that maybe there was going to be a learning curve that would set him back for a little while. But something tells me we've seen this movie before. And to make this short, Carmichael didn't just come back, he obliterated everyone because he would win all 24 races in his return, going undefeated for a second time. At this stage in his career, it would be easy to get lazy. He could have just slacked off a bit, maybe did a few less practice laps, gained a couple of extra kilos, or spent some of those multi-millions he'd been earning in prize money. But that's not Ricky Carmichael. He kept pushing, and he would have to. Because the whole time he's been rewriting the history books, there's this kid in Florida that kept breaking all of Carmichael's amateur records. Then all of his 125 professional records. There was this kid that people would not stop talking about because he rode a motorcycle like no one we have ever seen before. And that kid was James Bubba Stewart. In terms of raw gifted talent, we'll probably never see anyone like James Stewart again. He could do things on a bike that just defied logic. And for someone like myself who talks an awful lot and prides themselves on having a way with words, I'm always left speechless when I watch James Stewart ride. So the best thing that you can do is whenever this video is over, just grab your favorite libation and watch the 2014 Toronto Supercross and just take a moment to relish what true motorcycle poetry is. As the 2005 season began, not only did Carmichael have to deal with James Stewart and Chad Reed, he now has to get used to riding a new motorcycle because he switched from Team Honda to Team Suzuki. This would also begin the Stewart versus Carmichael versus Reed battle that would mark one of the greatest eras in all of Supercross, turning each one of them into mortal enemies. At the opening round in Anaheim, the race was a mud fest, so it was more of a war of attrition than a motocross race. There were crashes everywhere and bikes were overheating, but Carmichael would finish 3rd, Stewart would finish 5th, and Reed would finish a dismal 16th. Just a few days later, though, fans would get bad news when James Stewart would injure himself and miss the next 9 races, effectively ending any hopes he had to win a championship. Carmichael would win the next 5 races, and in 4 of those, Chad Reed finished a close second. James Stewart would come back late in the season and win 3 out of the last 5 races, but he was out of the championship running. But in the end, as it had been for the last several years, it was Carmichael's consistency in Supercross that won him the title. He never finished off the podium that entire season, again showing his maturity. With a Supercross title in the bag, the talk now moves towards James Stewart and outdoor motocross. Could he be the guy to finally end Carmichael's dominance? Well, would you care to take a guess on what happened? Carmichael actually went undefeated for a 3rd time, winning every round. But technically this didn't count as an unbeaten season because he did lose 2 motos, finishing 2nd both times. But what should be mentioned here is even though the score sheet indicated a total blowout, it really wasn't, because James Stewart did push him several times. And it also should be noted that Stewart was still racing on a 252-stroke when everyone else was on a 4-stroke, which led to Stewart crashing out about 1,000,000 times. But damn, was he flying. Now, the year would be highlighted with one of the most memorable encounters between Carmichael and Stewart, when at the Unadilla round, battling for the lead, James Stewart landed on Carmichael, knocking himself silly at the time. And on video, it looked like Stewart had intentionally jumped on Carmichael, but years later on James Stewart's podcast, they buried the hatchet and set the record straight, explaining how it was just an accident. Nonetheless, Carmichael won his 9th straight outdoor title, counting his 125s, and over the last 2 motocross seasons, he had won 46 of the 48 races, which is ridiculous. When the 2006 season began, the fans got exactly what they wanted in terms of drama and entertainment. It was the type of season where legends are made, because on any given night, either Ricky Carmichael, James Stewart, or Chad Reed could win. There was no room for error. Every weekend, the three would take turns battling out for the win. It was so intense that they had become mortal enemies on track, especially James Stewart and Chad Reed. And with all of the money and glory on the line, it created a once-in-a-generation battle. James Stewart was clearly a step faster than Carmichael and Reed, and he did win the most races that season, actually half of them. But what would plague Stewart was his multiple and epic level crashes, something that would haunt him throughout his entire career. But I guess when you're riding a motorcycle that fast, those things happen. Chad Reed would be up front every weekend, but he just kept getting seconds and thirds, only winning a single race. But at the end, it would be another textbook performance from Carmichael because he would beat them both with consistency. He did win his share of races, which was 5, but he podiumed in all but 2 rounds. When the fight moved to the outdoors, there were no doubters left. If you've got any money to your name, you are betting it on Ricky Carmichael, and that is a sure bet because he won another title. He would win 9 of the 12 rounds to take his 10th straight outdoor title. And to top it off, in one of the most savage motocross events in modern history, at the 2006 Millville round in a wet and muddy race, Carmichael lapped the entire field. Now it's just embarrassing at this point. Whatever unthinkable outdoor record you can come up with, Carmichael can achieve it. After that 2006 season, Carmichael shocked the motorcycling community by announcing that he would be retiring from full-time racing. But instead of just ending it right there, he would sort of do a farewell tour for the 2007 season, racing just a few select rounds. Now, you would think after all the money he's made and all of the wins that he's accumulated, he would just putter around and wave goodbye to the fans, but you probably guessed that's not Carmichael's style. He would race 7 of the 16 rounds in supercross, and he won 2 of them, and finished second in the other 5. Now, James Stewart was pretty dominant that year, taking 13 of the 16 rounds and winning the title, but it was clear that Carmichael was fast enough to challenge for the title if he wanted to. And when it came to his beloved outdoors, well, Carmichael was simply Carmichael-esque. He only raced 6 out of the 12 rounds, but he won them all. And what's really interesting about this is Carmichael won the first 5 nationals, and then his main rival, James Stewart, got hurt. He could have easily changed his mind at this point and raced the whole season, collecting himself another outdoor title. But he didn't. He won his final moto and he rode off into the sunset like a Hollywood script, ending the chapter as the greatest dirt bike racer that has ever lived. When Ricky Carmichael walked away from professional racing after 10 years, he amassed 15 AMA championships, 3 in 125 outdoor motocross, 5 in AMA supercross, and 7 in AMA 450/250 outdoor motocross. He had 150 total wins, which are 52 ahead of second place James Stewart. 102 of those wins came in outdoor motocross, which is 54 more than second place James Stewart. His 15 AMA titles are 6 more than second place Ryan Villapoto, and he ranks 4th all-time in supercross wins with 48. But those statistics take on a much deeper meaning when you consider the level of competition that he went up against, which includes some of the greatest riders that have ever lived. He took down the greatest supercross rider of all time, Jeremy Mcgrath, when Mcgrath was on top and in his prime. He beat the world's best foreign-born motocrossers like Sebastian Tortelli, Chad Reed, and Stefan Everts. He beat all of the next up-and-coming prodigy talents like Kevin Windham, Robbie Renard, and Travis Pastrana, and he beat the most talented rider of all time in James Stewart. And at the end of the day, no matter what planet they came from, what bike they were riding, what track they were riding on, what accolades they had achieved in the past, or what hype was tagged to their name, Ricky Carmichael beat them fair and square. But when I look back on all of this, as impressive as Carmichael's domination was, what stands out to me more is how unconventional his path was. How his mother, who had no prior motocross experience, created a training program that was better than anyone else had ever done before. How Alden Baker, who also at the time had no prior motocross experience, is now the most sought-after trainer in the industry. And how Carmichael's father still worked on his motorcycles while Carmichael was a top professional. Also, Carmichael's riding style wasn't conventional either. He wasn't ultra smooth and looked effortless like a Kevin Windham, Chad Reed, or Jeremy Mcgrath. He didn't drop your jaw like James Stewart. He often rode crossed up, feet flying off the pegs, swapping all over the place. It was unbelievable. And he had the most bizarre motorcycle setup you might ever see, where the ass end was dialed low, the handlebars rolled back. I mean, I have no idea how he rode that bike, but he did. And in the end, it didn't matter because he made it work. In Ricky Carmichael's retirement, he has given back to the motocross community. He's now a color commentator for the Supercross series, and the Goat Farm has become motocross holy grounds, acting as the headquarters for Star Yamaha, and his mother still trains up-and-coming riders. In sports today, we often hear all of these cliche quotes like, "You gotta want it bad enough." Hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. But truthfully, most athletes don't believe it. They just say it. But for Ricky Carmichael and his parents, they believe that, and they live that. And while their blueprint for how to build a winning motocrosser has been copied time and time again, what can never be copied is Ricky Carmichael's determination. No one in motocross history was or has been as determined, driven, and internally savage as Ricky Carmichael. And that is why he is the greatest of all time.